How's it going, people? It's your boy Veedu Vidz, and today I'm going to be doing something very different. I will be reacting to a video where Jordan Peterson is asked a question by a Muslim about Islam and the West, and why Jordan Peterson and many others see Islam as different compared to Christianity and Judaism. Let's watch the video and I'll give my comments.
Dr. Peterson, I have a lot of questions that arise from your comments at the Balfour 100 event, your M103 video, your recent discussion with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and your comments on Islam in the West in general. And in your comments, there's this common theme that one of these things is not like the other. You put the Judeo-Christian tradition on the one side and Islam on the other. Specifically, the, quote, complex problem of Islam and the, quote, as a, quote, totalizing system. And before I go further, let me state that if hypothetically, a final analysis of Islam resulted in as total a denunciation as your analysis of postmodernism or neo-Marxism, I wouldn't be personally offended at all. This isn't a personal question.
Well, firstly, before we even get into the question, I would like to give massive props to the person who's asked the question, who I believe is a Muslim, for saying that whatever your conclusion is about Islam, whether it's complete rubbish or whether it's completely incompatible with the West, I will not take it personally. I think we can learn so much from that statement. You know, before asking a question, you have to be ready for the response, and if you don't, and you have to be ready for the possibility that the person you're asking the question may not agree with you or might completely disagree with your views, and you've got to take it on the chin. So well done.
In your recent interview with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, she said, Western values are superior to Islamic law and Islamic values. I agree with that, basically, certainly in the context of, let's say, current global affairs.
Again, I've got to give another shout out to the person who's asked this question, saying that he himself admits that in the context of global affairs, Western values are superior to Muslim values or Islamic values. And I think this is something very important to note, that you might be very religious inwardly and you might pray, you might fast, you might do all these different things, but you can still recognize that on an international level, on a political level, your religion, even if it is the truth, isn't performing as well as other religions or other parts of the world where they might be secular. So again, well done.
Quotes from a Reason magazine interview, but you should read them because hers is a worldview which is very much the West versus Islam, not radical Islam, but Islam, including necessarily the military option. So my question is, at the level of psychological significance of these stories, at the level of mythology and archetype, how is Islam so different from the Judeo-Christian tradition? You know, because Adam, Eve, Havva, Satan, Shaitan, so on and so forth, everything from the fall to the flood. A lot of what you discuss in this lecture series is necessarily part of Islam as well. And in fact, I think one of the strongest criticisms of Islam is that it's perhaps pretty unoriginal.
Yeah, I've got to agree with the guy asking the question. If you were to look at the Old Testament, the Bible, and the Quran, if you were, imagine if you were to give these three documents to an alien race who could, understand or have at least the same brain capacity as us, and you just gave it to them without giving any other historical context. If they were to read it, they could see that there's a very common theme, a very common sort of thread between all these three books, the all Abrahamic faiths. Yes, they might differ. Some verses or some books might be harsher than others or easier than others or whatever you want to call it. But there is absolutely a common theme within these three books. To deny that, in my opinion, is just complete nonsense. Just simply like he said, Shaitan, Satan, Adam is mentioned all over the books, Moses. I believe Moses is the most quoted prophet in the Quran. So there's certainly, if you just look at the text, very common, a very shared history, a very shared language, a very shared terms of reference within the three books.
Tonight you said that the moral presuppositions of a culture are instantiated in its stories. I see a lot of the same stories. So current global affairs aside, I'm asking at the deepest levels, how different are these stories and the moral presuppositions?
So I think this is a great question by the gentleman who's saying that the moral presuppositions of a people are instantiated in the stories. And given the fact that the stories in the Bible, the Old Testament and the Quran are very similar, overlap on many different occasions, how different is Islam from Christianity and Judaism, putting aside the sort of international global political scene? Just purely on morals, how different are the three? Or how different is Islam from the other two?
That's a killer question. Well, Okay, so the first thing I would say is fundamentally, I don't know.
So the first thing Jordan Peterson says is fundamentally, I don't know. Some people might think this is a sign of weakness because he's not giving a very strong answer from the offset and saying, oh, Islam is different and Islam's got nothing to do with Christianity. To say I don't know, I think is a great sign of strength. Instead of making something up, he's saying, listen, I don't know. And I respect him for that, because if you say I don't know, that means you have the ability and the capacity to learn and change your mind. So that's a lesson for all of us. If you don't know, just say I don't know.
And so part of the reason that one of the things I'm planning to do is to have a series of discussions, and plenty of people have contacted me about discussing with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, because as you know, she has powerful and serious foes, and they're not happy with her black and white distinction. And so now I read Infidel, and I really liked that book. Like my sense was that she was a heroine. Now what that means in relationship to Islam, that's a different story, because she came out of a totalitarian, let's say, family structure in a relatively totalitarian society. And you could make the case that there's a correspondence between that and Islam, and you could make the case that there isn't. And of course, that's the critical issue.
So I haven't read Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book, Infidel, but I'm very familiar with her story. And she has gone through a lot of sort of tough times in her life in Somalia. And, you know, he himself, Jordan Peterson, says that I like the book, and that's completely fine. But he's also very careful to say that this does not necessarily mean this is an accurate reflection of Islam. It may be, it may not be. And he's right. Depending on which part of the world you live in, depending on what type of Islam that you're brought up with, Islam may be a complete tyranny to you, a complete oppressive force, or it could be something that makes you happy, something that empowers you, so on and so forth. So I'm glad he made that distinction.
And so there's a couple of things that I can't wrap my head around easily in relationship to Islam. And so one is what I see as the failure to separate church from state.
The first point Jordan Peterson makes is something which I agree with. Muslims have a harder time separating church and state, i.e. making a secular state, because of the nature of the Prophet Muhammad. And that is because the Prophet isn't someone who just told you to pray, fast, gave you certain morals, whatever. He is someone who also occupied a political position. He is someone who was the leader of the community in a political position. He was the head of a state. He led the army, so on and so forth. And of course, he is the perfect human being in the eyes of Muslims. So whatever he does in his personal life, we should imitate. And whatever he does in his political life, we should also imitate as well. And that's much harder to do. Now, having said that, there are some scholars, there are some people who say it can be done. You can separate church and state within Islam. However, I haven't seen a compelling case in mainstream Islam in Muslim countries saying this, that you can separate church and state and still be perfectly Muslim at the same time, and there's no conflict within your deen or within your religion. So I 100% agree with him. And arguably, it's easier within Christianity to do so. Now, although there was such a thing called Christendom, where the church did rule the state. So let's not forget that also. But I would say, they went through so many years, so many hundreds of years of wars. They had the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and they finally realized, maybe we should separate the two. So it's not as if from the go, within Christian countries or within Christianity, they had the separation of church and state. They had to work to get there. My belief is that if it can be done in Christianity, it can be done within Islam. It will be very tough and it won't be easy, but it can possibly be done. I'm hopeful. Also, you have to understand that Jesus himself did not occupy a political position. That is because he was crucified. If you're a Christian, Muslims don't believe he was crucified. Nevertheless, they both agree that he did not occupy a political position. So I suppose it's easier to make that case within Christianity. Well, Jesus was never a politician or a leader or the head of a state. So we don't have to agree with that. And there's obviously quotes within the Bible saying, give unto Caesar what, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and render unto God what belongs to God. So yeah.
And that's a problem. Now, it may not be a problem as such, but it's certainly a problem in relationship to the relation between Islam and the West, because we separate church from state. Now, there's fundamentalists in the United States, Christian fundamentalists, who think that that separation is a mistake. So it's not only an idea that's rooted in Islam that those should be united. But it's definitely a problem with regards to our coexistence, because that's a fundamentally different presumption. Okay, so that's problem number one. Problem number two for me, and again, this may be a consequence of my ignorance, which I'm trying to rectify. Muhammad was a warlord. And I don't know what to do about that fact.
So this is a very interesting point he raises, Jordan Peterson, that Muhammad is a warlord and he does not know what to do with that. So I'm going to give two sides of the coin, or two sides of the argument here, partly agreeing with him, partly disagreeing with him, and you can make of that what you want. He's saying that Muhammad is a warlord and he does not know what to do with that. Well, many prophets or characters within the Bible, within the Old Testament, are warlords. Many characters within mythology are warlords, whether they're Greek gods, Roman gods, Hindu gods, or whatever you want to call them. Religion deals with war because religion deals with humans, and humans get into conflict. Humans are violent. So if you're going to give the same leniency and the same, and grant the same privilege, or I'm not sure if privilege is the right word here, but if you're going to grant, certain gods or certain prophets the same context and say, well, people back in those days were different, and religion deals with violence, then why can't you give that same leniency to Muhammad and say, well, he lived in a warring area. He lived in a area where if the only way to be successful, or one of the main ways to be successful, was to take over other people's land, and slavery was involved, as slavery is involved in the Bible and the Old Testament and many other Greek mythology, this mythology, that that mythology, whatever you want to call it. Is Muhammad really that different in that regard to other prophets, to other mythological creatures or beings? Not really, to be honest with you. There isn't that much difference between Muhammad and Greek gods or biblical prophets in that regard. They owned land, they owned slaves, they had many wives, they did all sorts of things, war with each other because we have to fight for what is right, fight for God, and so on and so forth. All the same language is exactly the same. I don't find Muhammad any different in that regard to any of these other characters, creatures, or people, however you want to describe them. On the flip side, and I might even contradict myself here, is that the moment Muslims say Muhammad is perfect and we need to imitate his life, you open yourself up for a ton of criticism, because now you have removed context, because you're saying he's perfect for all time, all places, all people. So what he did in a warring, desert Bedouin culture is now relevant to the 21st century. And that's where I agree with Jordan Peterson, that what do you do with that? And there's not much you can do with that other than say it's either wrong or it's not relevant anymore. And even if we don't cast moral judgment on Muhammad in that regard, the moment you say it's not relevant anymore, part of Muhammad's life doesn't become relevant anymore. And that's only because most Muslims say he's perfect for all time, all places. Now, the way I would get around that is to maybe say, leave Muhammad in his context and extract certain principles out of his life. That is a path which I think needs to be explored more by Muslims and non-Muslims also. What were the principles in his life that are useful to modern day society? That is a more fruitful conversation as opposed to saying he's perfect for all times, all places, because in my opinion, that's not going to work. It hasn't worked because in his eyes and in the eyes of many people, Muhammad is a warlord. What do you do with that?
Like, one thing you can say about Christ, hypothetically, let's say, I'm not talking about a historical reality necessarily, although I'm not denying it either, is that of all the things he was, warlord was definitely not one of them. And I don't know what to do about that. And so I don't know how to reconcile that. And I don't know how to reconcile, like, not only was Muhammad a warlord, which I don't think is an unreasonable thing to proclaim, the expansion that he initiated was unbelievably successful. I mean, within 600 years, it was the biggest empire the world had ever seen. And it demolished Byzantine Christianity, which is something that Western people don't even know. You know, I've read thinkers who said that the West was so traumatized, culturally, let's say, by the demolition of Byzantine Christianity, that we can't even study it now.
That's a very interesting point Jordan Peterson makes. Islam was very successful, or the Muslim empire was very successful in the way it rapidly expanded and took over many different areas, including Byzantine Empire. And it was so traumatizing for Christians that even now it could be hard to analyze that period of time without going through some trauma. That's very interesting because I don't know. I've never seen it like that before, to be completely honest with you. And maybe that's why there has been a very strong, deep civilizational opposition with the sort of with European Christianity and the Muslim sort of Middle East. And this war of ideas, has much deeper roots than we all think. It's not simply post 9/11. This goes way back. But I would say, listen, man, there are Muslims living in the West, there are Christians living in the Middle East, and it's not a clear-cut distinction. Like, I'm from a Muslim background, but I live in the West, my home is in the West, I love the West. So we need to be having this conversation. And I think Jordan Peterson is right. He has said that he's interested in having conversations with Muslims to open his horizons, to get a better understanding of the Muslim world and its different perspectives. So we all have our trauma personally and from a civilizational point of view. But I think to get over our trauma, we need to have dialogue.
And so I don't know if that's true, but I don't know that it's not true either. And the Buddhists were wiped out of Afghanistan, and we saw that echoed in the Taliban's destruction of those great Buddhist monuments. And so what I'm hoping is that there's a bridge. There better be a bridge. And that's why I want to have these discussions, because I'd like to understand if there's a bridge. And so lots of people have sent me people who I should talk to, who they think represent Islam far better than Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And perhaps they're correct, and hopefully I'll get an opportunity to talk to them, because I would like to know if what I think is wrong.
So again, I'm in complete agreement with the professor here. He said that there needs to be a bridge between, the West and the Muslim world. We live on the same planet. We've got nuclear weapons. We can destroy each other very quickly. I don't think that's a road anyone wants to go down. So let's find a common narrative, a common ground that we can build upon, a bridge, like he said. And he's willing, and he said that he wants to speak to people from the Muslim community who may represent who may represent Islam better than Ayaan Hirsi Ali. I think she has a valid perspective. I don't think we should simply dismiss that. But there are many other perspectives as well. And there's nothing wrong with getting, different opinions and different points of view on Islam and on Muslims. So he has said that he's willing to learn, he's open to dialogue, and I think that is absolutely fantastic. I think the Muslim community can learn a lot from someone like Jordan Peterson, who has a great amount of knowledge in religion, in mythology, in archetypes, in all these things, which I think we should use these tools and, on the Quran and on Islam, on Muslim literature. I think that's something which we haven't really explored in our history. And I think that's due to the nature of Islam, because the Prophet is perfect, the Quran is perfect, and there's no room for negotiation. So that is a very big hurdle Muslims need to get over, in my opinion. So I completely agree with the professor. And hey, if you want to talk to me, professor, you're more than welcome anytime.
Because if it's wrong, it's important that I know it's wrong. But at the moment, I don't know it's wrong, and B, I don't see I'm not sure what it signifies. So, and I don't think anyone is sure, right? Because we have this entangling of the civilizations. You know, and there's other things too, like I'm not very happy with the Saudi Arabs and the Wahhabis. I don't think they're our allies. I don't see how any Western woman can possibly think that they're our allies.
So the professor mentions another great point, saying that he's not very happy with the Saudis and the sort of Wahhabi ideology, and that he doesn't consider these people to be the West's allies, even though historically they have been due to oil and, you know, resources and politics and whatnot. But ideologically, they're not really allies of the West. And I would go one step further. I would say they're not even allies of Muslims. Wherever the Wahhabi ideology has spread in the Muslim world, there has been so much conflict, so many problems with violence and radicalization. So I'm completely with the professor. If you look at what happens in Pakistan and Bangladesh and India and other parts of the world, Malaysia, Indonesia, wherever the Wahhabi ideology has gone, it has wreaked havoc. And actually, in fact, it has gone into or come to the West via propaganda, via, you know, these dawah mission of preaching and so on and so forth. And it is a huge problem. It is such a huge problem. And I think you would, you know, your message will resonate with many Muslims who are sick and tired of this Wahhabi ideology. The first people the Muslims that these Wahhabis go after are the moderate Muslims or the Sufi Muslims or the Shia Muslims or any other religious minority, because they don't like nuance. They don't like a difference of opinion. But I agree with you. The relationship the West has with Saudi Arabia is purely down to oil. If you were to remove oil from the equation, you would have a very different world.
And I'm not happy with the fact that the petrodollars that we send them are transformed in substantial part into the kind of propaganda that's definitely a threat to the West. And I'm not very happy with the fact that our politicians appear stupidly blind to that. Now, that may again be a consequence of my ignorance. It's certainly possible. But those are the sorts of things that I can't reconcile. And so, you know, I've also seen parallels between the ideas that I'm presenting here and other religious traditions, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism. It's harder for me to bridge the gap with Islam, and I'm not sure why that is. I think it has something to do with the things that I just laid out. Now, what I don't know about Islam would fill very many volumes, many of which I have sitting on my shelves at home right now because I want to do the reading, you know, as I progress through this. But, yeah.
So just to finish up on the last points he made, he's saying that he doesn't see the parallels that he sees, you know, within Christianity compared to Buddhism and other religions. He doesn't see the same parallels with Christianity and Islam. I would say, as I've said before, there are many parallels, but the history, the geopolitical factors contributing to the development of these ideas within Islam and Christianity has led them to very different sort of paths or destinations. Christianity and Judaism and other religions are a lot older than Islam, and they've had the opportunity to secularize, to have a very strong literary critique of their core documents and their core characters within their mythology, within their religions. I would say Islam on some level has, but nowhere near to the same extent. Furthermore, political factors have actually pushed Muslims back in critiquing their religion more openly. So, for example, you know, Western colonization of Muslim lands, not, you know, meant, yes, okay, fine, a hatred or a oppositional stance towards the West, but also an oppositional stance towards everything that was Western. So Western science or Western ways of reading religious texts. We said, oh, because the West are doing it, we don't want to do it. I mean, the word reform, you know, is seen as a Christian thing because, you know, there was the Reformation. So anything that was Western, even resembled Western, was also rejected. So that also plays, that also has a part to play within the sort of lack of reform or the lack of literary critique within the Muslim world. This is something which I discussed with Dr. Osama Hassan in a podcast previously. I'll put the link in the description below, where he was saying that a lot of Muslims rejected science or rejected certain methods of science because they saw it as Western, not because itself was, not because science in itself was something wrong, but because they saw it as something as part of the West. So we're against the West because they came to our country and colonized us, so we're going to reject science as well. And this could be the same with the way that Christianity has reformed, the literary tools that they have used. We're also going to reject that as well because it's from them. So Muslims, or rather the scholarship within Muslim countries, has been held back by this. But we can't keep using this as an excuse. Everyone on some point was colonized or colonized someone else. So this idea of colonization, we need to get over it. We really need to. I know it's easy for me to say, but we somehow need to find a way to get over it, because we're only holding ourselves back. Muslims can hate the West as much as they want, but you're only hurting yourself, because as much harm you see in the West, there's a lot of good that has been produced in the West. A lot more good, intellectually, scientifically, from an arts point of view, culture point of view. We can learn and sort of cross-pollinate between the two different cultures and religions. So that's what I would say. I think Jordan Peterson, is on the right path. He wants to understand, he wants to learn, he wants to have dialogue, and that's what I'm all about, having dialogue with people. So I might change my views that I presented in this video, and I'm completely okay with that. I'm completely open to people saying, Waleed, I think you're wrong on this, I think you're wrong on that. More than welcome to critique me. I'm more than happy to learn. But I think overall, Jordan Peterson gave a very thoughtful and solid answer to the question. And I've got to give praise to the person who asked the question, because the question itself is a very good question, a question that is relevant. And the person himself said, I don't mind if you say that, Islam is rubbish or Islam is nonsense. I won't take that personally. And I think that for me is the core message. If you don't take this personally, this is a question that transcends all of us individually. So stop taking it personally. Stop getting butthurt if I say something you don't like, or if someone else says something you don't like. Learn to take it on the chin. So guys, thank you for watching this video, and I'll do more of these in the future. Let me know what you think of the video below, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much.